Welcome to Life is Good. I'm Heather McCeown, your ever-loving hostess, right here in beautiful downtown Newport. And we have a good show lined up for you tonight if you've got an hour to kill. We'll have Dustin Tanner from St. Albans, who I've known forever, well, for the last 20-some-odd years, I guess, since I was working at the other station.
Yeah, I'm 28 now, and I got involved in station stuff. We talked about this before I showed up. You did the variety show at Enosburg Opera House, and I filmed one of those, and that's when I met you. So you know me for about, oh, thank God, 14 years?
Oh, well. See, the thing is, a long time for this young man. And he went to Missisquoi Valley Union High School. And
I went to Enosburg, not...
But where were you hanging? Oh, you working
so
at
MVU? At MVU, one of the things I did for the station was I was the sports commentator.
Oh, is that why?
So I would go to MVU and BFA. I'm an Enosburg grad, though, so...
There you go. So are my children.
There we go. So
nothing like an education. Yes. However, I'm going to start the show with a little preamble about something that really touched my soul this week. I was at my hairdresser's, and she's lovely. And we started talking about school shootings. And she's going to have a child starting school in about 4 years. So, of course, it's on her mind. And then we started talking about people's differences and why people can't get together and how you can lose friends if you bring up the wrong party, or you lose family discussions at the dinner table and argue if you talk about the wrong subject and disagree. And by profession, I am a mediator. And I became a mediator, I guess, in 1999. And probably before you were born. Anyway, I always try and shoot for the middle ground. And even if I might have very big ideas and opinions on this side, it's always so rich to listen to the other side, even if they're completely counter to what I believe. Because if you boil it down to a common denominator in this country, the country is our common denominator. And we can agree to disagree. If both sides stop listening to one another, it's too bad there are sides, but if both sides stop listening to one another, it won't get any better. And you can start this at your hairdresser's, or when you go to your grocery store and the checkout counter and somebody's wearing a pin you don't agree with, say, well, why are you wearing that pin? Or what's your opinion on this? And then keep your opinion to yourself for a minute and listen. And even if it's completely against what you believe, listen. That will open their ears to what you have to say. And slowly but surely, evolution, and you'll meet a middle road. We have to do that, and I hope you do. I learned an awful lot from my hairdresser yesterday. Things I hadn't thought about in her way. So it was enriching. And it was counter to my beliefs. But I woke up this morning feeling smarter because she's so brilliant. And you'd find brilliance in just about everybody who's willing to voice an opinion if they listen to you too later. So just for what it's worth, think about that. I've been thinking since I was talking yesterday. So now I can stop talking and talk to you.
I think your hairdresser did a great job, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much.
Just to mention the hairdresser part, right? Like, stay on that topic a little bit.
No, thank you very much. There's nothing quite like getting your hair dyed when you're 70.
I'm not there yet, obviously. I still have a good while to go. Hopefully I don't have to dye my hair at some point. I don't.
Have you ever dyed your hair?
I've never dyed my hair. I always wanted in middle school, I went to Fairfield Elementary School. So I thought the coolest thing ever would be to dye my hair blue and gold, like the Fairfield Trotter logo they have on the wall. My mom never let me do it.
Those are my school colors in Montreal.
My mom never let me do a lot of things that I think now have paid off. I didn't play football, didn't do normal teenage boy stuff like ride a dirt bike by myself, right? Like, things that, made me a little safer. So, but I always wanted to dye my hair. But at this point, I don't think I could get away with it. I think...
Well, you're a professional now.
Yeah, I'm professional now. I can't just, be really cool, but, I don't have the ability to do that now.
Well, you and I started talking again because of a meme.
Yes.
Now, I didn't know what memes were. My daughter and grandson introduced me to what they actually were. But would you tell my audience, audience, what it was?
A meme is, I've been thinking about, this conversation we're going to have and, trying to tie it into the fact that, there's an age difference, right? And, A meme is basically a photo of text shared that is humorous. It could be educational, it could be controversial, it could be funny, but it's basically putting some text on a photo and sharing it, basically.
And yours was?
So I posted a meme about wokeness, and it was this guy who was mad at his car engine, so we called it woke. And it was basically everything I don't like is woke. And it was a guy trying to fix his car engine. It was a cartoon, and it was just him calling the engine woke, which,
infuriating me.
I posted it because, I have people in my circle, who are like, that was funny, enjoy those types of things. And then sometimes I share them to Facebook and I get some different feedback from people because I don't share everything I post on Instagram and Facebook, and we had a conversation about it you messaged me and you asked me about, I don't remember what your exact message was.
I don't understand woke. It used to be important to have a woke part of society, stopping the use of things like negative denotations and nicknames that would hurt races, colors, creeds. So many things that I grew up hearing that I could quote here now that I would never say out loud.
Right.
And in that case, I don't think the wokeness was creating a negative thing because it wasn't destroying our history, it was making our futures better.
Right.
And that history, I believe, that still has those awful things in it is important to remember in that we can't whitewash our history.
Right.
And I cannot stand the idea of saying, oh yes, we've been perfect all along, because we never will be, we never were. And we're guilty of that kind of saying. So now when your friend posted the woke thing, I'm thinking, now it's gone too far. It's almost like taking Roald Dahl books and censoring them and taking the word fat and ugly out of old written books so that they won't destroy and give these words to the new generations.
Right.
And I can't go along with it to that degree.
Well, then that's where our Facebook conversation started, because to me, that's not what that word means. That word means to me the same thing it means to you, in the sense of like, you just need to be aware of the bad things and work to fix them, because there's a lot of ugly in America's past, present, and future. And to me, what I have seen in the media that I ingest as a 28-year-old who is online quite often. I work from home with an online job. I have a 3-year-old now. Like, the media that I see has turned that word into a joke and has weaponized that word in such a way that it's humorous in some cases, but also it's used to vilify actual progress. And it's used to...
Give me an example of that, please.
A great example of this would be in Florida. The governor of Florida has been using the word woke a lot when he's making bills that target people. Like
the transgender people.
Basically.
Brian is going to be part of the show too. And Brian is in between our generations. And he's a teacher, so he deals with teenagers all the time. So he's going to be a very important part of this discussion after we finish talking here. He's going to sit right here. And then you two will take over, and I'll be a fly on the wall, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to talking to Brian, but
But continue.
And it's but it's
weaponizing.
It's basically weaponizing, voices saying, "Hey, we need to look at how the system works, and we need to fix these things." And it's been used to paint a picture of one side that makes people look overly sensitive to things when, well, that might not be the case, right? It might just be people who are actually aware of what is going on in their communities and want to change them. And when they speak out, the quickest way to silence them sometimes is just to call them woke, make them a joke, right? Call them woke, make them a joke. But when you use that word and throw a lot of, when you put so many things under this umbrella, it actually takes away from the progress that these people, these minority groups, these poor people, these affected groups who are struggling through everyday life in America, it actually takes away some of their voice.
So I thank you for that, because that's what I think, only I've never been able to put it in words. Brian, before you come over, would you open the front door, please, because it's really hot in here.
Heather's got a wonderful wood stove.
Wood stove.
I totally forgot that you had the Hobbit-designed house, because that was one of the things that when you're living in Berkshire, long ago. I remember you talking about that, and it was like you posted a photo. Was it this house that you posted online when you moved to it? I don't remember.
Yes, because it's the only house I've lived in besides the one I lived on the farm when I first moved here.
Right, and you were so excited about the Hobbit thing. You were so excited about like the whole Lord of the Rings thing. You were so excited about this design of house.
I think everybody should live their fantasy.
I love it. I personally love this type of design because it's different. So I'm a huge fan of different architecture. Fun fact, part of the reason why I chose to go to Enosburg Falls High School was because of the glass hallways. Because as a 11-year-old, 12-year-old who had school choice, because I lived in Fairfield, so you can go to any of the schools. You could go to BFA. I could have gone to Fairfax. I could have gone to Enosburg. And I remember just looking at the hallways in Enosburg and thinking, that looks cool. And that's part of why I chose that high school. So
I think choosing a visually acceptable place to learn is very important.
Yeah, and I really loved going to that school and walking through those glass hallways every day.
And I wanted to live underground, so you and I are completely different that way.
There's an underground house on the Bakersfield Mountain Road. I don't know if you've been up there by where Rosalie Williams has her Lucas Memorial. If you keep going up that road, there when I was younger, it's probably not there now, but there was a dude who built a basement house, and the idea of building basement houses was so cool to me. When I was a little kid, I was like, you mean you could just build a house that's all basement? Like, that's awesome.
I know where that is. I know where that is.
Like,
I love that place. And you'd never know it.
It's so unassuming because it's underground.
I know. Anyway, I lived in Franklin County for 3.5 decades or more.
I think you have double the time in Franklin County than I have, and I'm 28 and I've lived in Franklin County for all but like 3 years of my life. So
it's really, really nice, eh? We had such a blast over there, but I'm having a blast over here now too. COVID wasn't very easy.
It was not. As somebody who had a kid at the start of it, it was a challenge. But I think we come out of it now with more tools to be, safe and as a good community. And it's exciting to come. This is my first time coming up to Newport in a long time. I used to play volleyball up here when Lake Region had a volleyball team.
It doesn't anymore?
They don't have a boys team anymore. But I came up here a bunch of times, and then I got my license up here because I was living in Richford at a time, or the Berkshire-Richford line. So I came up here.
Yes, it was I lived in Berkshire, so I was the epicenter of Montgomery, Enosburg, and Richford. Mm-hmm. Nobody stopped in Berkshire. They passed by going everywhere. But
it's always funny because I went to, when I was, I think I was 16, and I was taken to the Pick and Shovel. Or is it still called the Pick and Shovel up there?
That's the best thing ever.
And it's like, I was like, this is so cool. I can literally buy anything here. That's amazing.
You can buy a parrot, or you can buy a shovel.
Parrot, a shovel. I could fortunately buy the shovel if the parrot doesn't go well. I just walked through the Pick and Shovel one time, and so I've always had a weird love of Newport because of how it's its own little isolated city, but it's big. You have a movie theater, you have restaurants and things, you have that wonderful lake, and then you have there's a
great high school.
There's that downtown coffee shop. I remember coaching a track meet up at North Country. I'm like, it's beautiful up here. I've always
it's got a real track at that school. I can't believe it.
I've just always loved how you plopped it down here, and it's beautiful, and it's isolated, but it's not because it's, you have a community. So I always have a strange love for Newport. Anyway, back on topic.
Maybe you'll retire here.
Maybe one day. We'll see.
I've chosen that route, and I have zero regrets.
It would be, it's a beautiful place. Eventually when my child grows up, we talked before the show about how we're looking to move closer to my partner's family in New Jersey. It's something we're going to do, right? But one day when I am past my retirement age and I'm looking for a place to settle, I've always wanted to growing up in Fairfield, it meant a lot to me. Being in Franklin County, being in this northern part of Vermont.
There's nothing like it.
It's like the Northeast Kingdom would be a beautiful place to retire to.
I'll tell you what, when you and Allie and the baby want to visit, you can come and stay here. Come and just spend a night here and walk around and get to know the area. And I'd love to meet Atticus the baby and Allie, your girlfriend.
Oh, he's not the baby anymore. He is 3'5" last time we checked. He gets his tallness from his dad. He is gonna be very tall, and he is very active. And people are like, "How old is your kid? He must be 5 or 6." I'm like, "No, he just turned 3 a couple weeks ago."
It's amazing, eh?
He climbed. I was picking out his outfit for daycare today, and he decided to climb on the TV stand. And he says, "Dad, come here."
I'm on TV.
I'm like, and he's standing on the TV stand. I'm like, "Oh, we've unlocked a new hazard." You've had kids, so it's like how it goes. Where it's like, "Oh, we're doing this now.
Here's
Like,
a chainsaw. How does it work?
Like, no, we're not doing that. So
anyway, we did come to talk about something else.
We did.
We came to talk about woke, and when I get Brian out here, you'll continue that talk.
Yes.
But in the meantime, what did you think of my little preamble of sides getting together as you have run political campaigns on your own?
Well, I developed this reputation when I worked on David Zuckerman's lieutenant governor campaign because I took 2 weeks off to go to NASCAR races. And everybody laughed at me because at this time, I was a little more progressive back then, but what is this, woke progressive doing going to NASCAR, going to NASCAR events?
Oh, like you're defined and you're
I was literally driving to, what people thought at the time was the most, other-sided type of thing. And I go down to Thunder Road multiple times a year because I do a racing podcast as well with my buddy Nick Munley.
What's it called, 49?
It's called the Inside Groove Podcast. So Nick and I started this at our public access station, Northwest Access TV. We've turned it into a podcast, and we've turned it into, we basically cover Thunder Road. So, I've lived in this area where I can go into environments where I don't necessarily think I agree with people and have a good time with people. And I think it's part of my upbringing where it's, I think that you do have to draw a line at some point of what you think is acceptable as far as other opinions are.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think, when you have people who will look you dead in the eye and say, well, I don't think those people should exist, that's where you have to draw the line, right? But I think there's a greater class of Americans, and I think, the Joe Biden election is a great example of this, where multiple people who might not agree with each other can all get behind something and say, look, listen, let's calm down let's calm down a little bit, and let's sit down and let's slowly make some progress, and let's slowly work together. And it's an interesting place to be, because I know people who have different opinions than me, and I can sit down and watch a football game with them, right? I can hang out with people who have different opinions than me, and then you get to talking about those opinions, and then, sometimes you realize you kind of trying to figure out the same thing, but you just have different ways of getting there.
This is the wisdom of a 28-year-old, my friend.
So it's like, it's interesting to me because I think in order to make America a better place, I think, rurally right now, we have a lot of people who are struggling. And we have a lot of people who are looking for answers as to why they are struggling. I grew up, my mother raised me on $18,000 a year in state assistance, right? You will look at somebody who had the same upbringing and they will have totally different political views than I do. And I think it's sitting down with people and talking about, well, why are we here? What is working? What is not working? And what is working for you might not be working for me. What is working for my neighbor might not be working for me. What is working for me might not be working for my neighbor. I realized this the other day. The DMV is thinking about increasing the registrations from $74 to $89. And I, posted a tweet about it online where I was like, this is insane. And I got people from both sides of the political spectrum who liked it. And it was like, it's interesting to see that type of thing because it's, you talk about the idea of governance and philosophy is so massive that in a place like America where there are 50 states, there are so many different interests. You can drive 3 miles or down. You could drive. How far is New Hampshire from here? Like 20, 30 minutes, basically?
I don't drive
and,
much.
New Hampshire has a whole different idea and mindset of what they need to accomplish for their citizens, right?
Yeah.
So
there's a molecular change in the structure of the air when you cross the Connecticut River.
No, either.
I love living in Vermont. I love living in Vermont. And I cross over there and I immediately kind of feel the hardness of it.
It's a little weird. And it's like, this is right next door. And then you drive over to Plattsburgh, New York, or you drive... I went to Canada a couple weeks ago to watch a Ottawa Senators game because I'm an Avalanche fan, and the Avalanche were in Ottawa.
You have to believe now I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan. I am from Montreal. I grew up at the Montreal Forum.
Well, I wanted to go up to Montreal, but it was cheaper for me to go up to Ottawa, stay a night in a hotel, and get Senators tickets. And I realized because the Senators don't play in a great arena, and I had a hotel that was right next to it, and it was like there was no sidewalk, and I illegally crossed a bridge. I was like, oh, this is why the ticket was so cheap. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, we're too polite. We're too polite to run you over if you're being illegal crossing a road, and we're too nice. Hey, you're a tourist. Please come, break some rules.
It's really interesting because you go over to Rouse's Point and you see what type of town Rouse's Point is, and then you drive to Plattsburgh, and then you cross that Canadian border, and it doesn't feel like anything's changed. But you're in a totally different nation.
I know that.
You you have the experience, right? Going back and forth
across
the border. So you have dual citizenship, right?
I have dual. I became an American in my mid or early 40s.
Okay.
So. And I was allowed to keep my other citizenship, but I was extremely surprised they let me in. I'm still in shock, but thank you. And I'm very loyal. It was like wedding vows when I pledged my troth to this country. It wasn't a joke for me. I'd lived here for many years. I'd had my children for many years. Well, I've had them since they were born, but whatever. And when I became an American, it wasn't a joke for me. It wasn't something, and I wrote a story about it. On the stage, it was at Middlebury College. On the stage, and in the audience, there were women from Pakistan with worn out flip-flops over socks. There were black-eyed Russian men, very withered, their eyes black, either from their history or genetically, but it was, you look into them and you're looking into the eyes of people who have seen so much terror. Mm-hmm. And then over here, there were people who were adopted from some of the other countries, and their parents were having them become American. And I looked across these people and I said, why am I here? Why am I here? Spoiled brat. Because I can be. And because my former husband was transferred to the States. And I had a green card and I could work and I could do everything I wanted to do, and I could give birth in Chicago to the kids and keep them and raise them, and the country has been so blinking good to me. I want to start a business, boom, I've got a business. Want to do this? Good, people help.
Well, that's that promise that everybody still, there was an article in either Vermont Digger or NPR about how migrants are coming over from Canada now.
They are.
Because it's easier the St. Johnsbury Welcome Center has a ability to just accept migrant families and help get them where they're going. And that promise is still there, but, to bring it back to the conversation we're having about the word wokeness, you will see Americans trying to come across the border, and that will be sensationalized, right? It'll be turned into this 24-hour news cycle of churn of we can't let bad people in, and then you will get to know some of these people.
And you love them.
And one of the things that, Vermont is great about is that it's a wonderful state to live with our neighbors, but sometimes I don't feel like we have the education as a state to understand what is going on in some different parts of America, because there is, the maple curtain philosophy of, we are a little shielded. So, that's when it goes back to, I post a stupid meme, right? And you commented on it. I'm like, well, this is basically how I feel because of, I try to not shelter myself, and I've seen, I read the news in Florida, right? My half-Iranian brother is in Jacksonville, Florida.
How's he doing?
He's good.
What's he feeling? With DeSantis.
Well, he doesn't like DeSantis, but he doesn't want to leave Florida because it's not winter. And it's, the cold is really interesting up here. I weather that cold sometimes. And when it snows again in March, I'm just like, I do want to move a little more south sometimes. But it's just an interesting thing to grasp because, there are a lot of people who don't have the time to grasp these subjects.
Yeah, but at the time, this is one of the first generations, if you're raised working on a farm. When I worked on a farm, it was 70, 80 hours a week. I had 23 days off my first year, and once because I got knocked out by a cow.
That does not sound
fun. It was great. I could just hope she'd kick me the next night, because I was like, Lisa, do it again. I just want a day off.
And I think one of the differences...
But they had no time for extracurricular activities. They had no time... the tractor would break, or this would happen, or Mona had mastitis, or whatever. Your whole world exists there, and then
you're sheltered. You're sheltered off.
You have no time to worry about them because you're trying to get your cows to be bred.
You gotta farm. Like, farming is the way of life. And now, and I grew up in this generation where the iPhone came out. I think my 8th grade or 9th grade year. So I've been in this little world of, I learned school, I had school the way it was before. My senior year is when they started rolling out iPads. So it's like I had this little weird, the technology was dropped on us as I was going through school. I learned how to write in cursive. I'd still put my first letter of the first name in cursive, but I don't know if I can do the rest of it.
I think this might be a good time to bring in one of our teachers. Brian McCrae, please come and join us.
Right. But to just finish off that point quickly as Brian gets on set here, everything can come to you now because of how connected we are via social media. Like, everything can come to you now, and so we're more aware of everything. Brian. Hi.
Well, what do you think of this conversation thus far? Is this not a brilliant young man?
Yeah, it's good, discussion, and of course, like, I'm sort of in the same position as a mediator as a teacher. You've got to field questions from both sides and try to, like, understand and be empathetic. That's the whole thing, you know. I think, and the idea of wokeness. At one point I was having a discussion with friends.
Well,
we know.
I don't understand what you're saying
Yeah.
half the time. I think, well, but stop. We're usually out hiking or something, and
Right.
I catch half of it, and I'm thinking, I don't know where he's going with this, because I don't get it.
And we were
I get
saying,
it with the way you're saying it.
yeah,
Thank you.
it was similar to like when I was about your age. The term was political correctness.
Yes.
And that sort of got twisted. You know, at first it was about just accepting ideas of others and being considerate of other different points of view, and then that got twisted.
Well, now it's
was a
cancel
negative
culture.
thing.
I mean, respecting
Yeah.
other people's points of view is delightful, but now there's cancel culture.
Well,
they kick people out of their long-time jobs because they've written a story about somebody which may have been true, but
Right.
the person was so offended by it. People when you talked about sensitivity, you hit the nail on the head.
Well, it's this is the thing about cancel culture is that when I ran for Senate in 2018, a video of me telling some pretty bad jokes at Vermont Comedy Club, nothing like super inappropriate, just some dumb jokes that I learned in the stand-up class, came out, and I got canceled by people in the in my progressive wing of politics.
You want to tell us a few here?
I don't want to tell the jokes. They were dumb jokes that I wrote when I was that was 2018 was how far ago? So I took the class in 2017. So
Don't do math.
so I wrote those jokes 6 or 7 years ago. But one of the things that I learned was like you can't cancel culture for some people is avoiding accountability. However, if you do not offer an educational aspect where people can learn. What did you do wrong here? And you just, shun people and say, you're no longer, they're going to gravitate to, well, I'm just not going to take accountability. So the idea of cancel culture is like, I've been canceled. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, we want you to just learn that you can't say that anymore, right? There are things that you can say 10 years ago that you can't say now because it will hurt people. Yeah. But without a educational aspect, I think being a teacher nowadays is one of the hardest jobs because you have to balance what people will see because your students will leave your classroom and will be exposed to 5,000 different things. You got TikTok, you got Instagram, you got Facebook, you got group chats, you have apps that I don't even know the name of them. I'm only 20 years old and I work in IT. Right. And then you have to have them come back to the classroom the next day and be like, well, we still, everyone here has developing brains and we're just taking in so much.
So what do you do about that, Brian?
Well, it has to be an open forum for discussion.
Yes.
All opinions have to be respected, and you have to respect, because you can't just cancel. I mean, another discussion we're talking about was the Dr. Seuss books that they stopped producing because they had what today would be considered, like racist caricatures of Asian people, and then there was another issue with another book, and the society that is in charge of his legacy decided to, pull these books from publication because they might be controversial. And some people would have problems with that, saying, well, we got to see this for what it is. Another thing is all the statues and monuments in the South that were built after the Civil War, glorifying this,
They're canceling our history. That's what they're doing.
What you could do is, why not have like another statue next to it showing the opposing point of view?
That's a great idea.
So here's this is the thing where you get into that slope of those statues are built honoring people who wanted to harm.
Right.
And honoring people who if you're a black person and you see a General Lee statue, that person wanted you to still be a slave today. So why should there's a place where
there's a place where you can put them.
It's like I kind of think of like the steroid era in baseball sometimes, where it's like this is a really dark time. It's still a part of our history, but I think should we keep something like what should we do when it comes to those statues? I think you should take those statues and replace them, but take the statues themselves and put them in a museum that talks about what the Civil War was.
That's
and talks
a nice
about
compromise.
Why. Why we have to take the statue down, right? Like,
or if they leave them up, my idea was to surround them with the plaques explaining exactly what it was like and where we are today. Mm-hmm. So that's an on-site museum with an update and with a judgment.
And it's easier, but this is going back to the conversation. It's easy for 3 white people to stand here and say this,
right? Yeah.
Because we don't
Yeah.
And we're never affected by it because I don't have to, I don't see statues of people who tried to harm recent ancestors. We think about the Civil War, and American history is so interesting to me because it has been a lot. Okay, a lot. It's like the Civil War was not that long ago. You could transfer. You could have you could be 4 or 5 great grandpas down, and that great grandpa could have been a slave. So it's like easier for us to sit here as white people and say, well, this is what we should do. And that's part of why those conversations are always so hard, because you have to take account of what everybody is saying. Right. And, you also have to realize that there has to be an educational component. There has to be a healing component. There has to be a rational component. And that's why America, it's really hard to govern, because you have 50 states where you have multiple layers of this. No matter what you do, every subject.
I have spent time in the South where the N-word was very, very used by my neighbor and by anybody else. And I was still competing and running. And I would train by running into this great area, which was the black area of town. And I was actually chastised for that by my neighbor. And I had made friends with the people down that road. One of them was a retired gym teacher. I would stop running, and we would walk together, and he would tell me stories. And but I'm Canadian. We have a different issue up there. We have lots of issues up there.
The indigenous people's issues up there as well.
Well, yes, the Pope we do. But we also have French English.
Yes.
And, my member of parliament, my mom died in the end of September 1970. And Pierre Laporte was my member of parliament. My dad's, they knew each other. And Pierre Laporte came, and offered my dad all kinds of condolences. My mom was buried September 28th, and October 1st, Mr. Laporte was kidnapped, tortured, and killed by the separatist movement. And James Cross was the consul at the British consul, and I used to be over at the consulate a lot because his chauffeur and I were flying buddies, and we were always up on our little planes. And they were working on the Concorde, and he used to joke with us, we're getting together with France, and we're making a Concorde, Heather. And I'm going, I fly a Cessna 150, and want to race. And, he was a great guy, but he was kidnapped, taken, and by the same people, the same terrible people, and they offered his return safely to the powers that be in exchange for amnesty and free transport to Cuba, and it was granted. And Mr. Cross, as far as I know, never came back to Montreal. But we had that issue too, and we're still, I'm right in the middle with that, because when I was with my grandparents, I was the only English child in a French village, and my grandparents were the only English couple. So all my little friends were French, and we moved as a herd. And when I went back to Montreal, to the English ghetto of Montreal, which is, the Pointe Claires, and the, St. Lambert, Greenfield Parks, Westmounts, all those places that are just Anglophone. Mm-hmm. I'd get in trouble at school for speaking Frenglish. What do I know? And yet I also developed a great love for that culture, because when my mom was in the hospital 6 months a year, I was running around with French children as one of their own, and all these little French-Canadian moms were adopting me. And I loved their families, and I loved their mothers, and I just loved everything about how they lived and talked and treated each other. The baths right after supper in the Rice Krispie squares on the front porch with parted hair, just shiny skin and everything after supper. It was a different culture. Mm-hmm. And so when the argument started, I did understand the two solitudes aspect of it, but it hurt me from both sides.
Right.
And so I don't have black blood. I was totally disappointed when my daughter did that 23andMe, or is that a dating service? What is
DNA, yeah.
It's DNA. I'm sure there is a dating service that is also very similar name.
Yeah, how to marry your cousin in 20 easy lessons. Right, yeah. But I found out I was Scotch-Irish, and I said, I'm not Sephardic Jew. I've got no black blood, nothing. I'm so disappointed, because it would totally give me a deeper understanding of my mind.
Yeah, it's funny because I found out that my grandfather was born across the border in Quebec. My grandfather, when I did the ancestry thing, was like, I didn't know I had any Canadian in me. Huh, interesting. It was just a really interesting side plot. But that's the thing about these conversations, that they're really tough. And it's like, now, because we have everything in front of us, it's really hard to sit down. You know, one of the things I think we lose is that the 24-hour cable cycle, pick your channel, whatever it is, I think it's really toxic. I think
What is it? What is the cable cycle?
It's CNN, Fox, MSNBC. It's 24-hour news networks.
See, I don't have a TV.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great strategy in my opinion, because I think, you know, back in the day, you could sit down at the 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock news and just get the story. You know, all news has a little bias in the sense of, you know, reporting is reporting. It's a human element. But now it's just like, it's just in front of you. And
all
people
the time. Force fed.
attention.
You've talked to me about that.
Yeah, and you know, I think that, national news, and I worked in marketing for a long time.
Right.
So, you know, they got to sell ads. So
you got to sell that 2:30 a.m. ad, so you got to have a story at 2:30 in the morning.
You got to have the story, but then also your audience can't be, you know, this far to the right or this far to the left, because you're, you know, on my local news, I see a lot of pickup truck ads, you know.
It's always truck month.
And it's, you know.
We have a month for trucks?
So
it's 12 months a year.
It's well, there's Toyota-thon, there's Chevy Truck Month. That's another one of those, you know, culture memes.
My chair.
And you know, and yet they, you know, often it's said that, you know, there's a liberal bias, but I don't see that. I think, you know, they've got to pretty much bowl down in the middle to, you know, sell their advertising, and they do research groups and focus groups to, you know, listen to the stories and how the people react. They do their demographic studies, and that's the way it is, you know. In the old days, the news stations weren't necessarily trying to appeal to one, you know.
No, I remember the best part of
it was news.
The best part about news is we always had these wonderful, stable people who were giving the news, and we trusted them individually.
Right.
We knew it. We knew Walter Cronkite was going to do this, and in Canada we had many others who you know, we respected them. My mother and father would watch the news, and they'd dissect it, and they'd look at this man delivering it, and we'd discuss it after, and there were the news. My mother was an invalid, but she was sharp as a tack in many ways, and there was one show called Flashback, and there was another one called Front Page Challenge.
I remember that.
With Mr. Gordon Sinclair Sr. on that one, and who was a wonderful man, by the way. Wonderful man, skied at J. And CJAD. Well, it was his dad who was on the Front Page Challenge, but Gordon Sinclair Jr. was just a great guy. Anyway, my mother would sit there, and this is the jeopardy of my life. What happened in the news this week? And we would have paid attention to the news so that at 8, 9, and 10, my mother would say, Alan, do you know that? Heather, you were here. You were with me when that was broadcast. What do you think about this? And we'd hear it, and we would pay attention, and we would take it kind of as gospel, but the news wasn't inflammatory. It was delivered like toast. It was just a
matter of fact.
Matter of fact.
And so New Jersey actually passed a law recently, or is in the works of passing a law, a literacy, like a media literacy curriculum for schools. Because what happened?
You teach that.
Yeah.
What happened in my generation was that we were given all this technology, given all this websites, given, you know, you want it, you have it. No type of education on what, you know, how to suss that out, because you know, we really just peaked and went off the mountaintop when it came to technology, because one day we didn't have it, the next day we had it. There was no education. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, as a 28-year-old who lived at the edge of, like, remembering, you know, you could only get the news on WCAX at 6 o'clock. You could only I remember when WPTZ did, like, 5 o'clock news, and it's like, that's interesting. They're doing news at 5 o'clock now?
Yeah, what happened today that they have it ready for 5 o'clock?
It's 3 hours of news now. We're doing that. And it's like, to go from that to, like, now how you get all these sources, you know, that throws, you know, wood on the fire of these diversive topics, you know, because everyone gets their information differently.
Well, I did radio, and at one point I was asked, I had an idea. I was asked to be the announcer for the Oklahoma Dressage Society at their fundraising horse show for therapeutic riding. And Mr. Brady had been shot with Mr. Reagan and had a brain damage, and I had seen a show, maybe 2020, that had him riding a horse, and therapy riding would benefit him. So I called the White House and I said, excuse me, my name's Heather McCeown and I work for KRMG Radio, and I'd like to talk to Mrs. Brady, please, because we're doing a fundraiser for therapeutic riding. And she said, "Oh, I just can't give out her number." I said, "Oh, please, I'll give you my number, and you can have Mrs. Brady call me."
That's
well,
amazing.
they called Mrs. Brady, and Mrs. Brady told them to give me my number. They called me back, and I could call Mrs. Brady with the caveat: I must destroy this number and not share it. So I called her right from the radio station, and we had a great chat, and it was aired, aired about how therapeutic riding had helped her husband. And the news director came in and said, "Where's her number? Where's her number?" And I'd already tossed it in pieces into the garbage. He went through that garbage, and I had to grab it away from him and say, "I promised, no." And I took that garbage can, and I just went into the washroom and just flushed it all down. And he said, "How could you do that to the station?" And I said, "How could you expect me to break my word?"
Right.
And then I
can't believe you were able to just call the White. That's amazing.
You call the White House, and I asked this. Well, I've got this. People trust me.
I don't even know if I could find a phone number for the White House.
Oh, you can.
That's it. That's interesting.
But Mrs. Brady was lovely, and I did keep my promise, Mrs. Brady. You were lovely, and her husband was a dynamite guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, after that I had a head injury. So after that I went back to the station and started sitting in the wrong desk at the wrong office, and put me on air. No, you wouldn't want to put me on air because I didn't know what I was talking about. Then we realized there must be something wrong from the way you totaled your car yesterday, Heather. Oh yeah, you think? Yeah, drive me home. End of story. But that's the way the news is. It's a dirty little business if they get a dirty little news director who wants to make you go back on your word, give me your sources, give me your information. And a lot of people would buckle to that. Not a lot, but some people.
But then you lose the integrity of the news, and then once you lose the integrity of the news, But then one of the things journalists have to do sometimes is they can't say what their sources are, and then if you have a story that doesn't have sources, people will be like, "Well, nobody put their name to it, so it's not real," and it's like that's not how it works.
It used to be enough to sign my name to an article, but right now I'll look at some of the news people and wonder what is fact and fiction depending on their sources. But I would never ask to bear their sources, never. To prove their story, I would never. I'd have to make my decision on whether to believe it or not based on its content and the history surrounding it.
Right.
But, I love this conversation. I hope you're okay. Go and get a drink of water.
Yeah.
All right, this is politically correct bedtime stories. Modern tales of our life and times. If there are any bad words, and I don't know what they're in. I haven't read them since my kids were young. I've destroyed my children all by myself. Let's see. Politically correct bedtime stories. Little Red Riding Hood. If I come across something that's difficult or rude, I won't say it. Okay. There once was a young person named Red Riding Hood and lived with her mother on the edge of a large wood. One day, her mother asked her to take a basket of fresh fruit and mineral water to her grandmother. Not because this was a woman's work, mind you, but because the deed was generous and helped engender a feeling of community. Furthermore, her grandmother was not sick, but rather was in full physical and mental health and was fully capable of taking care of herself as a mature woman. Now, this is politically correct. How boring is that?
That was not the Red Riding Hood story I read.
Well, the thing is, this is politically correct.
Oh, she got eaten by bears.
Yeah, no, wolf.
No? A wolf.
But the thing is, in The Emperor's New Clothes, speaking of that fellow who is a liar to get into the Senate, what's his name again?
Right, yeah.
I just one sidetrack. Is there a politically correct way to be eaten by a wolf?
I would say with a knife and fork and with a napkin.
With good table manners.
Like as a 4-course meal, basically.
Yeah, with an olive,
An appetizer.
Yeah.
Here's a politically correct. Now, this is how boring the world would be if we were totally politically correct all the time. Here's to another boring story, but it says, The Emperor's New Clothes. Far away, in a time long past, there lived a traveling tailor who found himself in an unfamiliar country. Now, tailors who move from place to place normally keep to themselves and are careful not to overstep the bounds of local decency. This tailor, though, was overly gregarious and decorum impaired. And soon at a local inn, abusing alcohol, invading personal space of the female employees, and telling unenlightened stories about tinkers, dung gatherers, and other tradespeople. In other words, if everything is politically correct, it becomes extremely whitewashed and boring. So,
Right.
as far as woke goes, I'm all in favor of its use as it's intended. I'm not in favor of cancel culture without the education. I'm not in favor of anything that stops a person from a sense of humor if they're not, berating a race or anything like that. And I want to be free speeching. And when you read Wicked, the book, which is an excerpt from, the original Oz, but the first thing they do is they take the language away from the animals. The animals were the professors and the tradesmen and the people who communicated through to survive in life. And the powers that be took away their ability to speak, and the elephants had to trumpet, cows had to moo, dogs had to bark, cats had to meow. They were no longer allowed communicating in the universal language because it suppressed them. And when I hear of cancel culture, which is probably just, one or two stories above woke.
There'll be, you'll have woke, they'll just be sprinkled in the same news.
I get very worried that our voices are being taken from us in a very fascist way. And I don't agree with that. I mean, can you imagine if I could talk properly at all? It would be nice. I've had surgery. It's really hard. But, I really think we're heading down a path that isn't good. Not listening to one another because of political differences is one thing, but, translating people's words into what works for us is also very bad. And it gets right down to the middle road that I was talking about at the beginning of the show. We have to really listen. We have to be quiet a little bit. And we have to do a lot of accepting. And as you say very nicely, educating.
Yeah. It's all about education, I think. You can speak to that as a teacher, but,
yeah.
Understanding what the word fascism is a huge one right now in American culture. We are only a couple years removed from a non-American rally in Charlottesville with people who do not believe in America, who will use the guise of America as a shield to spout their anti-Americanness, right?
Exactly.
Put it nicely in the sense of, and it's one of those things where, the politically correct bedtime stories is funny to me because, comedians, I'm a fan of Mark Maron. He's a comedian, and he had a special in 2004 where he used the R word.
What's the R word?
Well, I'm not going to say it because you can't say it anymore.
Right.
But the R
Right.
word.
Yeah.
I can tell you after the show, right? Basically,
Okay.
and you go back to his specials now and you hear how he's changed the joke to get rid of that word. The joke is still funny, right? And I remember as a senior in Enosburg, we had a whole assembly about spread the word to end the word. Stop saying this word because it, takes special needs people and it disenfranchises them and it hurts their feelings.
That word.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's interesting because, you can still see, if you actually want to turn the noise off and listen, you can be woke and politically correct and not have to really change many things in your life. You can just be accepting of, that phrase hurts these people. Maybe I just change one word. That phrase hurts these people. Maybe I just don't do that anymore.
I'm totally for that.
And but what you see in the your phone is on, America, we love, you talk about marketing, it gets clicks. It's the story that's controversial.
Right.
Controversy gets clicks. So you don't see the stories of people sitting down and talking about how, hey, this town with multiple races, talked about this and fixed this and just moved on with their lives. You see the story about the guy who's protesting outside and says, well, why can't we say this anymore? Right? That's what you see because that's what gets clicks. And it's unfortunate because it takes away from the conversation of we just want to make a better America.
Yeah,
we just want a better America.
The thing that infuriates is the thing that gets the most attention. And that's
the most
An
likes
appetite grows on what it feeds.
Yes.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, my newspaper was called The Optimist. And it took the problems people were having and wove them into the light at the end of the tunnel that's a possibility at the end. And so you can take a sad story, a tragic story, you can take anything And the learning that comes from that, if you survive it, can be the light at the end of the tunnel for others. And when I started it, everyone thought it was a good news newspaper because it was called The Optimist. I did it for 30 years. But it was a good but realistic news was the banner. Realistic, but still good. And things like that. And how many people at the beginning said, it'll never work, Heather. You can't publish that. People don't want to read that. People don't want to read good news. I said, they have to have it sprinkled in to balance the equation. They have to have as much good in a paper as the negative. Mm-hmm. And it can be done. And it lasted 30 years and ended up going to 28 states and 4 countries. All Vermont writing and a little bit of New York writing.
It's amazing.
And people need, their appetite does grow on good news. Their appetite does grow on tender stories, even if a little pain is included. It doesn't have to be graphic. And I wish we could get back to giving the news without blood and guts. And enveloping, you know, and reaching around and hugging the world with, we're all in this together.
Because we are, though. We are.
You know that, and I know that, and everybody really knows that. But until we can get along like we used to, even with our differences, we got along. When I was head of the Democratic Party in my town, on the other side of the mountain, every party came to every meeting we had. We never got anything done. But we'd sing. We had a great time. And no, I wasn't the best leader, but every party was welcome when I had a Democratic meeting. Mm-hmm. And everybody respected one another. Everybody got along. Republican, Democrat, Moose Party, the party that wanted to legalize weed. Everybody came. And I would serve waffles to give them an idea. Waffle on your opinion. And the governors, I used to do the show at the House too. And the governors would come and an occasional ambassador and anybody who was in politics would come because they knew they were going to meet a friendly crowd. It was not because I had a camera and a mic. It's because when they came to Berkshire to meet the people of Franklin County or come to the studio over in St. Albans, they met an interested, open-minded crowd. And I think there's so many of us in the world who are like that, but we aren't being connected right now because we're being divided by these news stations.
Yeah, certain ones I think. You know, there are news stations that you can watch that I think.
Like
know,
PBS.
Yeah, I like PBS.
PBS, even though your girlfriend left.
I know.
Judy Woodruff.
I miss Judy.
Well, that's the thing. It's about when you take out some of the profit from the news too. It's one of the things I like about NPR is that you can read NPR and you know who their underwriters are. You know who's funding your news. You know, knowing where your money comes from helps you know. You know, one of the things that Vermont Digger does really well is that you know.
I love Vermont Digger.
You know who's underwriting them.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you know where the money is coming from, you know how a story might be slanted. And part of, how we went from 0 to 100 tech-wise is that teaching this young generation, suss out, look for the news where you can track where the money comes from so you can know what the sources are. So
and the politics are the same. I mean,
you can get the correct.
The PACs, the big PACs. Everyone says this PAC represents this company, but who's paying into it? Right. It could be 1,000 companies paying into that. And I didn't realize that until I moderated the debate.
And then what you'll see sometimes is that this PAC that's funded by 1,000 companies will own this news station. And then this news station gives you, the death of local America media has been really. There was this great feature by Timothy Burke. He clips online clips, and at one point 2 years ago, Sinclair, which owns over 100 regional news stations, had their news team read the same exact story in 100 different communities because that story was bought and paid for. And then when you put that into your news, it poisons the water of your community because that is a corporate interest paying your, that's a corporate, you don't own that media anymore. That news person who you sat down to trust, who we could sit down and trust, we can't trust anymore because we know that this is not your local news. This is bought and paid for, and you don't know who bought and paid for it, and this is what we present as news now. And that's why I think it's important to, to help with these divides is make sure you can you track where your news comes from, track who's paying for your news, track who, where it's, coming from.
Well,
but most people, like you said,
Don't have the
don't
ability
really have the time
because we're so busy just trying to get to tomorrow.
just
Yeah.
trying to get by. Yeah.
well, getting by and getting to tomorrow, I want to say these guests were great, weren't they? I am so blinking lucky to have a camera and a station so I can talk to these people.
And such great friends.
Yeah. Comfy
Anyway.
rocking chairs, a nice wood fire, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Who could ask for
Mr.
more?
Tanner, Dustin Tanner, young man who has grown up beautifully. And
I still have a lot of growing up to do.
Well,
It's,
don't we all?
I gotta
So
figure
do
that out.
I.
yes,
Someday
you do,
I'll
Brian.
grow up.
Anyway, no, we all have such a good time, but thank you very much for watching Life is Good. Thank you, Brian McCrae, teacher at one of our local high schools, and beautiful Dustin Tanner, who's just become a daddy 3 years ago, and
Has
It's
so many side projects. You don't
so
even
many
know.
side projects,
Yeah.
and all for the benefit of
That's
mankind.
crazy.
And benefit of mankind is the way to go, and that means being really good to people you don't agree with, and then they'll be good to you, and that will be a direction we might all end up being as center ground zero for getting along and just making America better
Work again.
because we're good. We're good people, all of us, even if they're on the opposite sides or on the street. You see a certain flag for a certain candidate on one, another for another. But when you talk to them one-on-one, they're lovely. And we've got to start back at that, leaving the politics out of it and just getting to respect one another as individuals again. Anyway, thank you for watching Life is Good. Thank you, Brian. Thank you very, very much, Dustin. It's been great, my young man. And thanks for watching Life is Good. See you next week.